You're listening to the great voice of the Great Lakes and All Talk with Tom Jordan and Kevin Deitz on 760 WJR.
President Joe Biden used forceful, divisive, inflammatory characterizations yesterday as he called on Democratic senators to help him advocate for ending the filibuster. He's doing this, Kevin, so the Senate can help usher in the biggest overhaul of voting laws in decades without any Republican support.
Yeah, Tom, the president was fired up. He was pounding his fists and sternly saying, I'm tired of being quiet. But is he really just howling at the moon? I mean, Stacey Abrams was a no-show at his presser in Georgia. Biden said there was a scheduling mix-up. I mean, really, who messes up their schedule when they're supposed to meet the president? I don't know how you mix that up. It seems like that would be really right at the top of your schedule. Anyway, joining us now is Dave Dulio, political science professor and director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. Good morning, David. How are you?
I'm well, guys. How are you?
Doing great. Let's just start with the president's tone. What did you think about the way he presented himself, and then we'll talk about the message.
I think you guys nailed it. He was angry, forceful. I think it shows that this is something that he cares deeply about, and he's apparently going to do whatever he can, albeit limited, to try and push this through.
It seems like his message is missing even with some Democrats. It doesn't seem like what he was saying lines up necessarily with what the rest of the Democratic Party thinks in this regard.
In terms of the voting rights piece or in terms of the filibuster?
Well, in terms of the filibuster first.
Yeah, I think, this is setting up to be what looks like a failure. In the Senate for the president and for Senator Schumer. It does not appear that if we take Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema at their words that they're going to support this rules change that we seem to be hurtling toward early next week. I think that looks like to me like a pretty big game of chicken between Schumer and Manchin and maybe Sinema.
You know, the president, he said yesterday, and he said this before, that Republicans are endangering Americans' right to vote by requiring things like identification and matching signatures. The president doesn't want those things, and he says those who do are preventing citizens from voting. Well, how do we know if they're citizens if they don't have an ID? I mean, first off, you don't have to look very far. I mean, New York City is kind of doing this. If he explained to the people, even Democrats, that what is in this legislation, what he's really fighting for, rather than calling, the Republicans racist because they don't want this to pass through. If he explained the details of this, do you think they would get, they would give him the support he needs to get this through?
I think that there is a lot of rhetoric being thrown around about what the different bills that are being supported by Democrats on Capitol Hill, what's actually in them, what the results of them would be. You go back to last year, and the president talked about how the law that was passed in Georgia, that it restricts voting rights. And, the Washington Post fact-checked that and gave him 4 Pinocchios. I think when we look at things like state ID laws, they are pretty popular across the country, even in minority communities. And I would add one other thing. This is something that gets studied by academics. And in the last journal article that I could find done by economists, it's in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. Your listeners can go and look at it. The abstract says, we find that laws have no effect on registration or turnout overall for any group defined by race, gender, age, or party affiliation, right? So if we're going to trust the scientists, if we're going to trust the evidence, we can look at something like that for what's really going on here.
Yeah, I've read that too, and I think it all comes down, as you said, it's down to rhetoric. Can you explain the value of the filibuster? Because right now Democrats don't like it because they've got a bare majority and they want to get things passed without lengthy debate. People who support the filibuster call it the soul of the Senate, and it gives people time to think and to consider what they're about to do. Is this necessary? Is it prudent, do you think, to stonewall a piece of legislation in this way?
Well, the filibuster, as you know, is a long-standing tradition in the U.S. Senate, and it has been used by both parties over the years, over the decades, right, to pump the brakes on legislation, to stop legislation. And there's a comparison that's often made, and it's that the House of Representatives often acts like a cup of very hot tea. It's sort of rambunctious, and it's partisan, and it's divisive. And the Senate for decades and decades has served as the saucer where if the tea were to spill over, where the tea cools. It's seen as a place and a institution that maybe dials things back a little bit. And that's what the filibuster has served to do for decades and decades.
Joe Biden was in the Senate for decades and decades. He supported the filibuster while he was in the Senate. Will he pay any kind of price for flip-flopping on this?
Well, Kevin, I mean, let's be honest about it. When's the last time an elected official paid any price for having a hypocritical viewpoint, right? I mean, or for changing position. So no, he won't. I mean, it's really an inconsistent viewpoint that many on Capitol Hill are taking. We've talked about Joe Manchin a bunch. He seems to be one of the few that is taking a consistent position on this. If we go back to when the Senate first changed the filibuster rules back in 2013, Democrats were fed up with Republican filibusters of judicial nominations, and they changed the rules back when Harry Reid, who's ironically laying in state today when this is being debated, right? Harry Reid pushed to change those rules. Joe Manchin voted against it then, as did Carl Levin from Michigan, voted against that filibuster change back in 2013. Manchin seems to me is one of the few that's being consistent.
Yeah. I wonder why we don't hear anything from the administration, the Biden administration, about paying for state ID for everyone. To say, hey, this identification thing's an issue in some communities. We're going to make it free, and we're going to get out there and make sure that everybody knows how to get an ID and gets an ID. But we don't hear that at all from this administration. Well,
and that's a good point. And in some of the state laws that have been passed, that has been part of it, where a state has said, look, we don't want this to be a hurdle, a hindrance, so we'll make them free. And that's in response to some of the criticisms that, this would be something like taking us back to the era of poll taxes, when you had to pay to cast a ballot. Well, nobody wants to see that, right? Which is why you do see in many states that adopt these laws that they will make the acquisition of them free of charge to anybody who wants to get one.
Yeah, that resolves that argument right there. Hey, Dave DiIulio, appreciate your time, political science professor and director of the Center for Civic Engagement at Oakland University. Dave, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.